Hello and welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. Welcome to this week's episode of The Contented Narrative, where we will be looking at The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Written by Washington Irving and published in 1820. It was then adapted to screen in 1999, and I'll be looking at four things. I'll be looking at the film, the book, the plot, and overall. Now, bear in mind there will be spoilers within this episode, as there are spoilers in every episode. So if you've neither read nor seen the film, do go ahead and watch them or read it before you come over to ourselves. Now the film. It is a classic Tim Burton film, back when he was sort of decent and not when he was going off the rails with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We're just not going to mention the later films. The atmosphere is amazing, the music, everything to it, and it really works. The thing that makes me smile the most is the main character, Ichabod Crane, who is tasked from New York to find the murderer, but then it's revealed that it's actually a headless horseman. The scene where he gets told about it being a headless horseman is hilarious, because he's sat there with his cup of tea and they're telling him all about this headless horseman, and he cuts back to him and he's like got this little cup of tea like shaking in his hand, and it's brilliant. He's an absolute coward and yet he still does his job, so fair play to him. The story is brilliant, and when I actually read the book and realised, what they had to work with, they really pulled it out. I loved all of the special effects. I loved the look of the horseman as well. It was just absolutely brilliantly done. It takes you through all the twists and turns, and you kind of sat there going, is it this person? Is it this person? Whew. Even though you know who the killer is, you're just like, oh, nice. And the cast is brilliant. Everything is amazing about it. So honestly, I would give it a 9 out of 10. I would recommend anybody watch The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It's a fantastic film. Now the book. I say book, and I use this quite liberally because it's a short story that is 34 pages long. So this baffled me completely when I was reading it, because honestly the film is so intricate. It has so many different plot points. The short story is rather sweet, and although you think it's more of a horror, it reads more of a misguided romance. The little story is set amongst Irving's other stories. As you can see, it's a collection of short stories. And other stories. And if you have a few hours to kill, his collection does have a few good points, a few good stories in there, a couple that I probably wouldn't recommend, but overall I think it costs like £3 off Amazon, so for the sake of about 3 or 4 stories, I'd pay that money. Now, although I would have liked for it to be a bit more supernatural, considering you're talking about a headless horseman, I love how easy and quick of a read it was. The reason why it probably doesn't get as high a rating for me, and it gets a 6 out of 10, is because the actual prose, the way the story is told, the way it's written, is a little bit sort of dated, and obviously it's of its time, but for me it was a little bit hard to read at points, and I had to kind of go back over a paragraph or whatever to truly understand what it was that he said. But I would give it a 6 out of 10. I'd say, if you're looking to kill time and you can dip in and out of it, it's like, Grimm's Fairy Tales and my ghost story collection, and amongst other things that I've got, you can dip out of it and you can read a little short story, put it down and come back to it. So the plot. Now, as we can imagine, a full feature-length film from a 34-page book is not going to be exactly the same. So do bear with me as I try my best to explain the plot differences. I think it'd just be easy to say it's like two completely different narratives. So the film starts with something being signed, and then a horseman running down and beheading 2 villagers. The story, however, starts with our author telling us all about Sleepy Hollow and the apparition of the Hessian horseman, who is the headless horseman. So the story of the headless horseman is completely different. In the book, his head was knocked off by a cannonball, then he was buried in the church, and he's sort of seen running around and chasing people, but he's not really a murderer. He kind of just keeps himself to himself. In the film, the Hessian is a bloodthirsty soldier who sharpened his teeth to points, who liked riding into battle on a big black steed and beheading everybody. He was hunted down, and as he was hunted down, these 2 little girls in the woods are looking at him. He's like, shh. One of them snaps a twig. He then gets found, beheaded and buried in a grave. With his head, completely taken off. So already the story of the actual Hessian horseman is completely different, and he's Ichabod Crane's the main character, but he is sort of like the secondary character. Anyway, so in the book, Crane is a person who came to Sleepy Hollow to teach children. That's right, he's a school teacher. In the film, he is a New York constable who they shoved to Sleepy Hollow to solve murders, but also partly to get him out of the way. So in the book, we are aware that Crane teaches the kids in a very stern teacher, and he ends up staying a week at a time with parents as he can ill afford anything else. And he ends up becoming, kind of friends to everybody and doing odd jobs around the place. In the film, Crane stays with the Von Tassels. He hears that the Headless Horseman is the killer and then encounters the work of the Horseman when the elder Mazbeth gets slain. We find out that the head is taken from the scene, and he is told then that there are 4 graves, but 5 bodies. Which, as soon as anybody says that and you know that one of the victims is a woman, you would automatically go, she was pregnant. But no, for some reason, this didn't cross their mind until they did a full-on autopsy. So we find out that one of the victims is pregnant. Now, there is also a little spark between Crane and Katrina Von Tassel. Now, this is in both. However, in the film, it's sort of unspoken and then just kind of draws them together. In the book, Crane goes out of his way to woo her. Now, in the book, Crane is very accepting of witchcraft and even likes to tell tales about it. In the film, he is almost afraid of it, even if Katrina does turn out to kind of be like a good witch. So, in the book, Crane's whole mission is to try and get Katrina to fall in love with him, to then go off and he will be a master of the land and all of that, and he's got all these visions of what's going to happen in his life. However, in the film, at this point, another 5 people are killed. So you've got the magistrate who told Crane about the unborn child. You've got a family of a mum, a dad and a little boy. And then a stout young man by the name of Brum, who tries to take on the Headless Horseman despite it not being after him. But he kind of pisses it off that much that the Hessian decides to kill Brum anyway. Which, if you're just walking after you've just killed 3 people and some person comes and attacks you, you're just trying to go about your business. So anyway, Crane then comes across another suitor of Katrina in the book called Brum. But in the film, he doesn't seem to be as much of a threat because we also know that he dies. In the book, however, there is a rivalry started between Brum and Crane, both of whom are trying to woo Katrina. And it seems like Crane is winning at one point. Now, in the film as well, Katrina also has a stepmom. This doesn't appear to be the case in the book, as Katrina's mum is still very much alive. So, in the film, Crane gets an idea about why the deaths have happened and how they're connected. So he goes to Notary Hardenbrook and he finds out the truth. And it's this. The Van Garretts and the Van Tassels are kin. The elder Van Garrett redid his will to include the widow Winship, whom he married and has fallen pregnant. The older Mazbeth was witness. Then, because the magistrate knew about the marriage, he died. The family then died because the mum was a midwife to Winship, and she told, we'll find out later who she told, in front of her husband. So Crane believes that it was Baltus Van Tassel who sent the horseman amongst the living by stealing the head to control him, so that he will then inherit everything, because if all the Van Garretts and all of their heirs are dead, the Van Tassels get everything. However, in the book, Crane is at a gathering at the Van Tassels and people exchanging stories with one another, many about the Headless Horseman. So we finally come across the actual Headless Horseman. I mean, we hear about him in the stories. So in the film, Katrina sees the evidence that Crane has to maybe convict her father, and she burns it. They have a bit of a falling out. Then later that night, everyone is meeting about the horseman because the Notary Hardenbrook has hung himself because of this information is coming out. When Baltus Van Tassel going to get his new wife, sees a horseman approach her, and he rides away to the church. So at this point we go, oh, another victim, bye-bye. Now at the church, it's obvious that the horseman cannot cross the boundary. So in the film, they've made it quite clear that he is not allowed on sacred ground, on consecrated ground. Yet in the book, he's buried on consecrated ground. So, whatever. So then anyway, because then there is almost a confession to the secret of what has been causing all these deaths, there are another 2 deaths. The priest basically bashes the head in, and then he gets shot, and then Baltus Van Tassel gets a stake through the heart that is thrown from outside the boundary of the church straight into his heart, pulled out through a window, out to the end, and then completely beheaded. Because obviously he must have his heads. So in the book, something passes between Crane and Katrina that causes him to leave in anger. So it's almost like he hasn't won. He's not happy. He's then going off in anger, and he rides off at the witching hour. So then he passes a few, and this is still in the book, but he passes a few landmarks which are said to be the home of spirits. But he also ends up trotting alongside who he thinks is the horseman. And I'll say thinks because we'll discuss that in a moment. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So in the film, after the death of Baltus Van Tassel, Crane is about to leave. He decides that, no, I've had enough. Everybody's dead now. There must be no more killers. But then he sees the body of the dead Mrs. Van Tassel and realises that there's a cut on her hand that he saw inflict on Mrs. Van Tassel, but it can't have been because it's not done before death. It's been done after death. So he kind of turns it round and he finds, he goes in, he inspects the body and goes, this is not Mrs. Van Tassel, and realises that actually he hurries back to save Katrina because it turns out that the stepmom was the one controlling the Hessian horseman. So Crane is then rushing out to save Katrina. And little young Mazbeth as well has been helping because he needs to avenge the father's death and he's an orphan. And they manage to sort of like escape through setting a mill on fire and, riding off. And they basically ride off to the dead tree where the Hessian is buried. And then they realise that the stepmom, for some reason, is there as well. She seems to just be everywhere. And she is basically still trying to get this Hessian horseman to take out Katrina, and even now to just take out, Ichabod, and to take out the young Mazbeth because she don't care no more. So in the ensuing struggle, Crane manages to grab the skull and give it back to the Hessian horseman. Now, because he now has his head, he doesn't have to do the bidding of anybody because he's no longer the headless horseman. So what he does is he then stills Katrina's stepmom because he realises that she's the one that's been controlling him all along and bringing him forth from hell. And then him and the horse and the stepmom dash right back in through the tree into, I'm assuming, hell. And you see sort of like this splurt of blood come out, and then it's over. So the film ends with Katrina, Crane, and the young Mazbeth, who's been helping Crane, all along, living happily back in New York and away from Sleepy Hollow. Now, the book. So the book has Crane trying to outrun the horseman. As he's crossing the bridge where the horseman magically disappears nearly every single time, the horseman still follows him across and hits him in the head with the horseman's head. So he ends up, being hit in the head, and then you never see Crane again. You never hear of him again. And so a lot of people think he was taken to hell by the goblin, the horseman. A lot of people think he might still be alive, but somewhere else. But then because the book ends with Brom and Katrina marrying, there's that little thing that, Brom kind of makes a little innuendo that maybe it wasn't the horseman that kind of chased him away. Maybe it was Brom, but we're never entirely sure. And it kind of leaves with, is Crane still alive? He probably is, but So anyway, the plots are so different from the occupation, the lack of murders, the film, it feels almost like a love story in the book, whereas in the film, obviously, it's a horror, it's a thriller. Both narratives are completely different, and it's almost as if the film has just taken the characters' names and the name of the short story to make this film. And I'm kind of glad they did, because what they made was so much better. I mean, I love the little short story I did, but honestly, the film is so fantastic. Brilliantly done. But obviously, because of the fact that it's so different, it gets a 2 out of 10 for me on how close is the plot. So anyway, overall, the setting is the same. It's still set in a little sleepy town called Sleepy Hollow. The names of the characters are the same, however, that's it. The plot is completely different. The actual characteristics are different. What they do, who they are different. The overall story is not the same, and as enjoyable as both narratives are, overall it gets a 2 out of 10 because it is so not the same. It is almost like you've got 2 different stories of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. You decide which one's which. One's a murderous Hessian, and then one's just one that likes going out and scaring people. Now, obviously, as you are well aware that this is my own opinion, it always has been. If you agree or disagree with anything, leave them below in the comments. If, as I said in the previous episode as well, I'm starting to do guest stars now that we're kind of opening up a bit more with the lack of COVID. Well, I say lack of COVID, it's still going on, but you know, do leave below in the comments if there's a book to film adaptation that you'd like to do, and maybe we can get ourselves together to get that sorted. But always remember to keep it content. So thank you.